Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of In Progress. I'm so excited today. We have on today my very good friend, Robert Cano, and his narrator for his books, the Soul of Sorrow series, Charlie Cundiff. So welcome. Hello. So good to
Hello.
have
How's it
you.
going?
Good. Robert, do you want to start by introducing yourself and letting our audience know who you are and what you write?
Hi, everybody. There is still feedback, isn't there? Hang on a second.
Technical difficulties.
Technical. All right. How about now?
Yeah, I think that sounds better.
That sounds better?
Yeah.
Okay. Just had to switch from the mic to the headset.
Sure.
So sorry about that. My name is Robert Cano. I am the author of the Soul of Sorrow series. A lot of what I do is fantasy and science fiction primarily. I do have other things in the works right now. I'm working on a series that's starting with the book Echoes of Brazilian, which is a Arthurian lore retelling. And I also have more books coming in the world of Audiobook, which is where my Soul of Sorrow series rests. And then I also have some more books coming from my sci-fi side of it too. So keeping busy.
Awesome. So glad you took time to jump on the show tonight. And then, Charlie, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do?
I've been narrating Robert's books. Other than that, I'm a stay-at-home dad. I train martial arts, and I also take care of my aging parents a bit.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
Well, glad that you both could make time today. Hi, Anita. How are you? So today we're talking a little bit about narrating audiobooks, writing, and how those two are kind of interconnected. Robert, we've had on the show before, but why don't we remind our audience what got you started in writing?
Mostly as a release. For me, it's a measure of catharsis. So I kind of figured out at some point that the best way for me to release a lot of the traumas and stuff like that I've been through in my life, I had to get to the point where I could write it out. That was how I let it go, and maybe not let it go is the right term, but at least dealt with it in a more healthy fashion than other options. And so that was my first foray into it. I started with writing poetry. It was for a girlfriend in college, and it was terrible. So I don't suggest ever trying to go back and find that stuff. It doesn't exist. But yeah, so here we are. All this time later, I'm still a poet. I recently wrote a poem for another fellow author, A.L. Manco, and that poem was written specifically for that book. So he was pretty excited about that.
Very nice. I also have some horrible poetry that I hope no one will ever find from high school.
I understand.
I feel like every poet and every writer in general kind of has that little notebook that they don't know where it is and they hope like got lost forever because it's got their old writing in it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I burned mine.
Oh, sad to lose the words, but I understand the motive.
Yeah.
How about you, Charlie? Oh, can you share something you remember with those early poems?
I can actually. I kept one.
Oh, nice.
One. It was called Love Through Love's Eyes, and it's basically my idea of what love was, talking about all the things it is and all the things it isn't. Um, and that one is something. It was the first poem I was really proud of. It was very abstract in nature. It touched on a lot of my misgivings and misunderstandings about what it is. And I think it's fascinating to be able to go back and read it again and just kind of see how much I've grown.
Right. The growth from where you were back then. Yeah. That is one nice thing about looking at old writing is you can see the evolution, not only of your writing, but of you as a person. Right. Charlie, how did you get into voice acting?
Well, that's an interesting story, I suppose. Where I used to work, I listened to a lot of audiobooks. Like that's what we did all day, and we listened to them as a group. There's maybe 2 or 3 people that worked there, and so we talked about what we liked about the different narrators and the voice actors.
Mhm.
And I don't know, about 5 years ago, Robert, like we were chatting, I think probably on Facebook Messenger, and Robert said he's going to be writing some books. They'll be published, and I'm like, okay, well, when you do that, I'll narrate them for you, and because
Nice. Yeah.
in your mid-30s, everybody says they're writing a book.
Right.
Everybody's writing a book. So about 5 months later, he's like, okay, so here's what's going on. I've got this. I'm picked up for a trilogy, but I'm going to self-publish this one. And let's start with that one. I'm like, oh, okay.
Prequel, yeah.
All right. I guess we're going to do this. So from there, it was a big learning process. I went and bought, like, I don't even know if it's in here, this little microphone that I'm like, I'll just record this on whatever on my computer and edit it. It'll be fine.
Right.
And so, yeah, I started with The Suffering.
Yeah.
And so suffered through recording that, I think, 4 full times.
Oh, yeah.
Editing it twice, or
Mhm.
most of the way through, like on the 3rd time I recorded it, I realized the way I was doing it wasn't right, and it was going to be easier to go back and record the whole thing for the 4th time.
Right.
But now I've got everything working a lot better. Yeah.
Yeah, you got a whole system figured out now.
Yeah, I built this little room in my house.
Yeah, it's a nice setup. But yeah, he definitely called you out on your dare.
Yeah, yep.
And he wrote the whole series.
Yep. But yeah, it's been lots of fun. I've always kind of done voices.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, the harder part, I think, than the voice acting was, learning to make to do the narration, to make that interesting without overdoing it. There are definitely some narrators that narrated a lot of books that overdo it the entire time. I always remember Scott Brick because he does so many of those thrillers, and it's one I can't stand, even though I love the books. Don't do that.
Right, and that's really the important thing about picking a narrator for your series. They can really make or break your story in a different medium, in a different format. So it sounds like it's kind of a natural skill that you have to develop and figure out how to process it.
Sorry, I couldn't hear some of what you said there.
Oh, I was just saying, it sounded like it was like a natural skill that you had, but you just had to develop the process of it.
Yeah, I definitely had to develop how to, figure out a character, but being in contact with Robert made that easier, or I don't know, I guess more confident in picking a voice, because I'll send him an idea and he'll say, oh, I like that, but maybe it'd be more like this, and I'll hash out a character in that way. But yeah, definitely the harder part, I think, has been just the spoken, using my own voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Who likes that? Their own voice.
It is interesting.
Yeah. Hearing recordings of yourself is kind of like, do I really sound like that? Like, for me at least, I'm always like semi-horrified by the sound of my voice. It sounds different in here.
I'm very, very used to what my voice is like now, because I've spent a lot of hours listening to it. Yep.
Robert, what appealed to you about doing an audiobook? It sounds like it was your idea from the beginning.
Honestly, the only reason I thought about doing it was because Charlie offered. So because I didn't know I didn't know he was bluffing at the time. I was like, oh,
I kind
okay.
of wanted
So
to. I did want to.
I, yeah, I kind of figured you did. But yeah, I was like, I didn't know you were bluffing, but we got to sit down, we got to have this conversation and stuff, and um, he was like, no, I do want to try it, and so he sat down and he started doing some recordings, and those early phase recordings were rough, we'll both admit to that. But I personally don't listen to audiobooks near as much as other people do. I think I've only listened to one audiobook all the way through. Um, and that's because I'm not really an audiobook person, and that's fine, but I was told that they are the way of the future, and that we should probably be doing that. And so um, the fact that Charlie offered was kind of a huge thing, because then I didn't have to think anymore. I just be like, oh, okay, well, that's on Charlie. That's on you, bud.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right.
um, but yeah, it was good. He's brilliant, and it was actually kind of interesting, because Charlie and I have known each other since third grade, and we've been friends. Well, we were like, he was my best friend in third grade. I don't know about the other way. And then we kind of drifted after that. And then come high school, I didn't even know he was in the same high school as me. We had that conversation not too long ago. But yeah, like he said, about 5 years ago, we got in touch again. And it was like nothing ever was missing between those times. And it was kind of nice. Um, and so we in a lot of my writings and stuff like that, I can rely on Charlie too. So it's not just like, oh, he's just my narrator. He's also like a source that I go to, uh, because he's absolutely brilliant. And so um, yeah, I find it's very beneficial in different areas of that, because he has a very interesting background, um, as to what his degree is in, what his past work has been, and that kind of stuff. So it helps me out a lot.
I'm just gonna address this to Robert first, but did it change anything about the way you wrote, knowing you were going to do an audiobook?
No.
Okay.
If anything, that's been one of the major tricks with in talking with Charlie and developing the voice over the years, because I have a very distinct style, as you know. I know you edited The Suffering and The Dark Archer, so yeah, that style that I have is very unique, and it's almost poetic in nature. And there's the syntax and the sentence structure is incredibly complicated at times. So I am aware of that, and so the good thing is that Charlie and I went to the same school. We're products of the same school system. So the fact that I knew what I could read meant that I knew what he could read too. And so I didn't worry about him being able to pick up on that. Now it was a source of um, not friction, but something. It was a source of frustration at times, trying to get that nuance right in enunciating the sentence properly, and in performing that that narration. But he give him props, because he was a trooper and he pulled through on that. What do you got?
Yeah, some of that was especially not the suffering so much, but getting into that opening chapter of The Dark Archer. The the sentence structure is really complicated, and trying, if I read it, I know what it means, but then trying to say it in a way that's going to make sense, it does matter how you emote it. And that is something that I found tricky, especially that first part of the Dark Archer. And I do think that that after the first half, that maybe I got better at reading it. I think it's gotten a little less intense in the or in the complexity of the sentence structure, where you've been able to get that poetic nature without being without the structure being as difficult to follow.
Mm. And that could be growth. I mean, I think with the Shadow Cult I feel was written a lot more simply.
Yeah.
It's more direct. Um, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's very action packed. Like there's not a whole lot of internal monologue or dialogue or structure or anything like that. It's mostly external, dealing with everything's going crazy out there.
There's
But
a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of
yeah,
dialogue.
but in the world soul, would you say that in the world soul it got back a little bit toward that internal side of it?
I haven't read it trying to speak it yet.
Okay,
Yeah.
that does change it.
Yeah.
Charlie, is there anything that you wish authors would keep in mind when they're going to have their books narrated in audiobooks?
I don't think so. I think you have to write the way you're going to write. And yeah, it's going to be up to the narrator to be able to do it, or know that it's not their story to read. I think it's I mean, I've never written a novel, but it's a hard enough thing to get your style out there, to figure out how you want to tell it, and then to think, well, okay, but what if I was saying this out loud? I mean, that's probably something good to ask yourself, to make sure that it's going to come across just to a reader. But unless if someone is writing specifically, uh, if they're going for an audiobook uh, audience, maybe there's a way to go about it, but I don't know what that would be. I read what I get.
Would you say that you think audiobook is stronger with more description or more dialogue?
I've probably listened to 500 books, and I don't know. I mean, every kind of book. Or the boss's wife would basically just. I mean, we wouldn't even know what to do anymore. She would just go to the library and get 5 straight books off the shelf. After a while, I think it all works. We can listen to anything. Yeah, I mean, a lot of them, listening to like Freakonomics, where it is nothing but narration, where they're just telling you something. Those are great. Whether it's completely acted, those are great. I think everything works in audio format.
I would agree. How do you approach like a book that's new to you, and like finding the voices and figuring out how to bring the words to life?
Well, they've all been new to me. All 3 that I'm on right now. I'm on the Shadow Cult. I start out with reading ahead, or reading the book first, so I understand the story, and then I need to understand the motivations of the characters. Then you get an idea. I think anyone, when you read, has an idea in their head of what the character sounds like, whether it's what someone else thinks or not. But I take that and I come up with something, run it by Robert, and see if that works. And part of the voice, you have to get into character. I make the facial expressions. I'm in here moving around, doing things like that, because I think you can't just do the voice. You have to be the character, even if nobody sees it. If you if they're happy, you have to smile because you can hear a smile.
Hmm.
Um,
It's interesting that you say that because when I'm writing, it's the same. Um, I'm actually acting sometimes when I'm writing, particularly in action scenes. I will actually make sure that the fight works the way that I've written it. Because that's part of my mentality. I grew up in martial arts, and you're doing martial arts, even now. So all of that stuff, it just kind of sticks with you, and you kind of know the mechanics of the body, and then with some of my characters, I have added mechanics, or I take away a mechanic, right? So like, early in the Shadow Cult, we meet General Malata,
yeah,
and
I was just singing her when you
she's
said
got
it.
a tail, but then she ends up missing an arm, and and then in the World Soul, she has wings. What? So like, how do all of these different things work, right? And how does she maximize her abilities using these different things? I don't have wings and I don't have a tail. So, trying to figure that out is usually kind of the trickier part, so
But you
it's
can run
cool.
on all fours. Right?
Yeah, exactly. I can run it all, not very well, but I can do it.
Right. So I want to talk to you, Robert, a little bit about your writing process. I know we've talked a little bit about it before, but how do you go? So part of it is acting out the scenes, especially fight scenes. I think that is really important. But what else is involved in your writing process?
So I'm a pantser, right? Which is honestly kind of one of the harder things right now with Echoes, because I can't pants that one I have to outline, and so I'm working on the outline for that. But with the Soul of Sorrows specifically, I started with this idea, and what happened was initially there was this anthology that some friends were putting together called the Maidens and Magic Anthology, and I thought, hey, I want to submit to that. And so I created this short story for it. It was about 17,000 words long. I cut a lot out of it, and then I submitted it. And it was turned down, but the feedback I got was really good and was really high praise. So what I did is I put that to the side. It tells the story of this girl named Raven, and in that story was this particular woman who was like a mentor to Raven, and her name was Shayana. So what I did is I was like, okay, I need to tell Shayana's story. And then I asked a friend of ours, Devani, if I could use her name, and she let me. So Shayana was Devani first. And so I told the story of this princess named Devani. And I went through and I put this novella together. And in that process, it was just, let's just write out the words. Let's just write out the story how it is. It was very raw. It was very in your face. It's a survival tale on multiple fronts. It's called The Suffering for a reason. Um, and then when I re-released The Suffering later on, I actually wrote the foreword for it that talks about suffering. Um, and the reason for that was because the whole premise of the book was founded on these concepts, right? And so as I was writing it, I was going through the different ideas of what suffering means, and in different cultures, in different stuff. Primarily, I was focused on Buddhist thought, but I explored other avenues as well, because you can't find a religion throughout the world that doesn't discuss or contemplate suffering at some level, right? And so that was one of those things that I wanted to kind of focus on, and And so the story took on a life of its own. And there's quite a few of my readers who have said that that book is still their favorite because of the fact that it is just so raw. Even cleaned up, there's just raw emotion, raw power, just unbridled energies about that book. That I always find it fascinating to hear from readers who say, that that's still their favorite. It's kind of cool. But that was really the process. I just kind of had this idea of what the book is, and then I just started telling a story through the eyes of this girl. And I didn't actually add Bene until much later, even though he's a very, very small role in the suffering. I had already started writing The Dark Archer before I released The Suffering. And in The Dark Archer, obviously Bene is like it, right? He is the character. And so before I released The Suffering, what I did is I went back and made a couple of changes at the beginning, and I added the epilogue at the end. And so at that point, we got to see who Bene was before the change, and we got to see what he became after. And then in The Dark Archer, I was able to really flesh out what he had become, and then give us flashbacks of who he was before. And we get more of that as we press on through The Shadow Cult and The World Soul, where we've kind of realized that Bene he's been through a lot. He's lived a life that's, the life of a warrior. And that's not always a pretty thing, right? So that was kind of my process with a lot of that, was just kind of exploring ideas and exploring these concepts of what suffering is and everything else. Like it's fascinating to me because I never really, I didn't start out with the concept of suffering. I started out with telling a story of survival, and suffering became a part of it, right? And then with The Dark Archer, I started out telling a story about a survivor, and it ended up being about PTSD and depression and trying to find a way to overcome yourself and trying to find a way to live with the person you have become, even if you don't like that person. And so those were things that became very difficult in the writing of the story. And I never realized how much of myself I put into those things. It just, took on a life of its own.
Right. I feel like we embed bits and pieces of ourselves in each character that we write, and we often don't realize like how much of ourselves ends up in there. I really love the character of Bene because there's such maturity and depth to him, and because he is a survivor, and because like he is grappling with who he is versus who he wants to be. And I find that pull, that tension between who he is and how he's perceived and who he wants to be and what he's constantly fighting against himself to be, is really, 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 really strong and powerful. And I love the metaphor of it for, PTSD and everything that, people have been through as survivors and how it affects you and does change you. How was it for you, Charlie, to bring this raw emotion to life?
It's well, I hope it comes across. It's all there in the words of the story. The narration coming up to it, so you know what he's feeling, or I feel like I know. I gave him kind of a gruff voice, so he's already always kind of sounds like he's having a bad day, even if he's saying something happy. So that kind of helps. But yeah, it's all there in what he's saying, because it is a book to be read and you do have to be able to get it from the words. I just add a little bit of icing.
I'm sure you're being a little bit modest. The words are fantastic. I know. I've read
Yeah.
the first book, or the first two books, but I guess my question is, so I know Robert, yes, it does remind me of someone. Robert talked about writing being cathartic for him. Is voice acting the same for you, where you can kind of work through emotions, maybe some negative emotions you've been feeling, and kind of put that into the character and kind of get it out of your system?
I don't think so. I think it, it's not the same to me as writing is. It's fun. It takes you out of whatever else you were thinking. Um, I suppose you have your experiences that you have to emote with, that you can pull from, but I don't feel like I use it to deal with it, other than the fact that when I'm here, I'm in that moment. Like anything else, like any other thing that you dedicate yourself to, it's being in that state, which is the therapy.
Right. So your emotions more aid you in the process of acting rather than, okay, very
Yeah.
cool. Is there any way in particular that you like to tap into your emotions for a scene, or?
I'm not aware of what processes I might have. I I do them. I'm sure that there are certain ways that I do that. I don't know exactly how that goes. I think of a character, I think of what I've just read, what they're going through, and I try to put that in there.
I know I'm asking all these impossible
Yeah.
questions to answer.
Yeah, and well, the thing about me and Robert, I guess I'm a pantser narrator in that way.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
in that, it's our ADHD process.
Oh, I can definitely
Yeah,
understand that. Yeah.
it's our ADHD process where we're like, you just do it, and it works.
Mm-hmm.
I know
Yeah, and I find,
we're cheaters like that.
yeah, at least for my writing process, it changes all the time too. So it's hard to pinpoint like one thing that works every time, because every time I change a little bit. It's
Yeah,
constantly evolving. Um,
and I do
Rob,
have to go back. Sorry, I do have to go back sometimes in recordings. I'm like, wait a minute, I don't remember what I did with this character. Like, I can't remember what I wanted them to sound like. I have to go back and figure out, okay, what did I do in chapter 3?
right,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
When you're,
And
yeah, I have a hard time sometimes. Like I'm constantly rereading through my previous chapters or my notes, because I'm just like, what did I do in chapter 3?
yeah.
Like, totally understand. Robert, what book would you recommend to a new writer?
What book would I recommend to a new writer?
Mhm.
Like something that teaches writing, or
It could be something that teaches writing. It could be a book that you love that really just like exemplifies good writing. Wherever you want to go with it.
Don't say
okay.
Ulysses.
I know, right? Well, it's funny because I read all of the classics, so um,
Mm.
I'm like, oh, the Iliad or the Odyssey. No, I'm just kidding. Don't do that.
Oh, no.
I do love those books, and I do read them for fun. But no, don't do that to yourself. If you're not ready for those, then it's not a good place to be. But as far as there are some master classes that I've read in books. There is one particular short that yeah okay, Joe. There is one particular short by Isaac Asimov that is called "Rain, Rain, Go Away." It's very short. It's like 5-6 pages long. But this story is an absolute masterclass in not only creating an atmosphere, but also being able to be very punchy with the story and incorporate an epic twist that you saw coming but didn't know was going to happen. right? Everything was there, and then when the twist comes, boom. That little story has stuck with me since I first read it. I was maybe in third or fourth grade, um, and I read it like out of a highlights or something like that. Like it was something random. Um, but that little story is an absolute masterclass in just little details meaning so much, and just how to do a twist and how to do these different things. That would probably be my number one recommendation. There are other books to read. There are certain authors that I absolutely love. Um, if you want to learn simile, uh, go read Sean Cosby's work. Blacktop Wasteland, Razorblade Tears, go read them. That nobody simile is like that guy. It's just straight up. If you want to read something that is dark and moody, go read Anatomy of a Darkened Heart by Christy Stratos, which that book is officially on my top 5 all-time books list because it is so good. It's that book is a masterclass in so many things. Just perfect description, just knowing how to look at an idealized desire and flip it completely. It's incredible. And I mean, I could go on and on and on, but those are things that really stand out to me. And another one would be just studying any of Anne Rice's novels for description. There's nobody who could just do description like she could. I mean, there are authors who spend pages on something. I mean, Tolkien would spend pages on a tree, right? But it didn't matter. Anne Rice, what she did was, it was all relevant. Everything mattered. Everything, pertained somehow to the story. So yeah, that would be what I would suggest as far as who to read if you want to learn kind of very specific elements of the writing process or storytelling, how to just kind of be masterful with it.
And I love how varied your list is, because I really do feel like reading widely is how you learn about the different facets of writing. Like reading romances will teach you about relationships, reading fantasy will teach you about world building, different things like that really do apply. I know, Charlie, you said you listen to hundreds of books. What is your favorite book or favorite author?
Yeah, again, so many of them, they run together, but I think the book that was the most fun just to be anywhere in the book was David Copperfield, by Dickens. I mean, you don't know where the book's going. It's just, but the way he writes it, again, I think that's someone you don't have to study. You just read it or listen to it, and uh, yeah, I mean I think that's just for a single book. That's my favorite of his, and maybe my favorite novel. Uh, yeah, and I was thinking of like what narrators I like. My favorite that I've listened to that I remember is Jim Dale, who, if you remember the show Pushing Daisies, you never
Oh,
watched that?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was the narrator for that, but he narrated the Harry Potter series. And
Oh, very
most people will read that, of course, but,
nice.
the guy that I worked for was a big fan, so anytime that someone new came to work, we listened to the entire series again.
Right, right.
Well, first we had to wait for 3 of the books to come out, but yeah, by the time yeah. So I've probably heard them all 3 times or 4 times, and, he just has a nice, understated
Mhm,
approach to it. Of course, he has a nice English accent
mhm.
that he uses, unlike what he did. And if you ever saw Pete's Dragon, he has an American accent in that, so that's who I thought it was going to be. But
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's the shyster in Pete's Dragon, the one that's like selling snake oil and stuff.
Oh,
But yeah.
very nice. Robert. So we know that Robert likes to write science fiction and fantasy mostly. Do you read a different genre than you usually write?
Oh, I read everything. I'll read just about anything I can get my hands on. Some of my favorite novels of all time are actually science fiction. But you know, uh, if I actually look at my even my top 20 list, there's very little science fiction or fantasy there. There's maybe 1984 is on that list, right? But that's because that book is just breathtakingly good. It's the story is always relevant somehow, and that part I just can't get away from that. How amazing that is. With some of the others though, I mean, um, I've been singing the praises of Anatomy of a Darkened Heart. Uh, that one, took me by surprise. If I'm being honest, not that it was good, but that I loved it as much as I did. Um, but then other books on that list really are like Hannibal by Thomas Harris, um, Blood and Gold by Anne Rice. Um, I mean, I kind of just read everything. Uh, I love a lot of the classics. Romance of the Three Kingdoms uh, is amazing. That's one of the Chinese classic uh, narratives. There are, I mean, I'll read All Things Homer. I'll read, um, just all of that stuff. I read everything I can. I've read most classical works that I can get my hands on. I find that there's a beauty to them. So, like Le Morte d'Arthur is not so much a novel as it is a narrative. It just tells small bite-sized stories about the knights and about their travels and adventures and stuff like that. There's no dialogue to speak of. There's nothing like that. But it covers such a huge span of time, and it covers so many different situations and stuff like that. That it was just incredible. Medieval literature is a fascinating one to me. Anything that survived any of that time frame is fascinating, and I also have done a lot of studies and just kind of looking into all of that world. And I don't think the Dark Ages were as dark as people like to think they were.
Right. It's kind of like the Dark Ages were just comparative to what they could have been had, there not been like the fall of the empire, rather than they were truly not creating anything during that time.
Yeah, well, there's also like the Ottoman Empire and stuff like that. The Persians going on during that time, that they were super advanced. There wasn't a whole lot of loss going on, to be honest, as far as technological advancement. Um, I like looking at the Mayans a lot. Around that time frame, the Mayans were probably top of the world.
Right. It's a very kind of Eurocentric view to call it the Dark Ages in the first place, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I have a question I want to ask both of you. We'll start with Charlie. Where do you find inspiration?
Well, I suppose I'm not trying to create something new, so I find the inspiration for the performance right there in the book. Um, as for actually getting into the studio, I would like to get it done. And get on to I have another book. There's another book out that I have to get to.
Right, the third in the series, or of the trilogy,
Part of
yes,
the
the last
trilogy, yeah.
of the series, yeah. How about you, Robert? Where do you find your inspiration to write?
Well, first of all, Charlie is being incredibly modest. He's actually a really good writer himself. He may not be an author.
A secret this whole time?
Yeah,
Ah,
he's actually quite brilliant. He doesn't necessarily write fiction, but he is a brilliant writer. He could easily transfer into fiction if he wanted to. But with that said, I think for the question at hand, I suppose I don't know. I kind of just I think I just like telling stories. I like getting whatever's in here out somehow, and the easiest way to do that is usually with fantasy, because I can cover topics that might make certain people uncomfortable, and I don't have to apologize for it or step on people's toes vertently.
Efficiently.
right. It's a great way of exploring our world's issues in a different world.
Yeah.
It happened in our duel.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, do you find information? So, of course, being a storyteller, like natural storyteller, is really important for authors. But like, do you find inspiration, like people watching or like overhearing a conversation, like sparking ideas, like,
Yeah.
Are you a people watcher?
I am.
Yeah. I think a lot of us are. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll sit and like, if I'm in a public place, I'm using that to my advantage because I hate public and I hate people, right? In large groups, especially. So if I find myself in such a place, you can be guaranteed I'm going to use it. Or if I'm dragged to a party of some type or anything like that, I'm
the introvert at the party.
Yep, exactly.
Finding the dog, watching the people, exactly. Yep. Charlie, now that I have discovered your dark, dirty secret, what do you write if it's not fiction?
Oh, I don't get down to writing much. Most of the writing I've done has been in editing Robert stuff in the last few years. Before that, I wrote my master's thesis. I like to write things. I like to create stories, but I don't usually actually put them down.
Oh, that's a shame.
I move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
How do you commit to a whole story for a year? I don't know how you do.
Well,
or in the case of Mother's Love, a month. We just go write that one in a month, right? I don't know how you did that.
Right.
I got this extra book coming out. But you were just writing this other one.
Right.
Mother's
Not
Love,
by sleeping much, I'm sure.
Okay, first of all, Mother's Love sat there untouched for like 2 years.
Oh.
Like, yes, I wrote it in 35 days. 55,000 words in about 35 days. That one wrote itself. But as you know from starting to try narrating it, that is not an easy task, because that book is really messed up.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm like that one just kind of like came out.
Yeah, but it's all human voices. So yeah, one thing that takes time is I do use some editing on the voiches to add effects. Not a lot. Usually it's dropping voices for the dragons or the Chiron and the satyr. So I can talk here, but if I talk here and then drop it to that point, you get a different effect. Or then the dragons go down to if you're on a piano, a little bit below the wood, right? And I'll take the put a flanger on some of them just to give a different sound. Because if you go up a little bit, it doesn't sound as good. Go up, put a flanger on it, so it gives it just a little bit of different voice to it. So that takes some time. A little bit of extra time in the editing process. But I think of Mother's Love. Oh, it's just like 7 or 8 total characters. You really got a voice.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm looking
That
forward
one's a
to
little easier
what
to
that's like.
narrate
Maybe
then.
I don't know. I'll see when I get there. If that one's happening.
Yeah. So one last question before I'll ask where we can find you online. We were waiting for a nice character voice, like introduction, weren't we? Oh, a little bit.
Should have turned Benny right off the start.
Yeah, right. Oh my gosh, there's the character voices. I love
There's Benny.
it. What writing advice do you hate and why, Robert?
Write what you know. It's like I understand the premise behind it, and I'm okay with the premise, but at some point, authors stop trying,
I gotcha. Mm-hmm.
and I don't like that. You have to push yourself. I think we have to continue to grow. I mean, there's growth even between the Dark Archer and the Shadow Cult and the World Soul, as we pointed out earlier, and then you switch over to Mother's Love, and it's a completely different writing style.
Yeah.
And then now with Echoes of Brazilian, I'm going like almost unabashedly old school with my sentence structure. And the reason for that is because of the type of setting, the type of world, the type of atmosphere that I want to create. All of those things, they matter.
Right.
And so, yeah, I just want to make sure that when I'm telling that story, that's what comes out.
Yeah.
Written in 4th century Gaelic, then.
Right. Well, there's one thing. There's nothing that pulls you out of a book faster than like anachronistic writing. So it's set in this world that's olden times, and then all of a sudden you have like, what's up, or something that just doesn't match, and it just ruins the atmosphere. So yeah, it is important to build the atmosphere, build the ambiance, and all of that stuff. Oh my gosh, I am a contaminator. Yes.
I could do it, Joe. Don't tempt me.
Enter
I know
Karima.
a sonnet or two in his time. So before we sign off, I'd just like to give everyone the opportunities to let us know where we can find you online, where we can learn more about you, or if you have anything that you want to announce or promote coming up. We'll start with you, Robert. Where can we find you online?
You can find me at Facebook. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter. Instagram and Twitter, I don't Twitter very well, guys. So if you ever try to hit me up on Twitter, I'm probably just, I'm going to be useless there. But I do have it. It's at Shadowy Embrace there and Instagram, both. I am probably on Instagram the most. I find that I get the most interaction from people. I've gotten the most readers from there as well. So it just has been a good place for me. Don't expect reels and stuff like that, though. I don't really play those games, and I don't TikTok. So that kind of limits my options. But with that said, if you want to come visit me, I have a group on Facebook called Beyond the Fall. You can join me there, or you can take a look at some of the stuff I have up for free on my site at shadowyembrace.com. That is where I have some mini stories. I have some poems. I have just some writing tips, stuff like that. You can go and just kind of peruse it and see what fits, see what doesn't fit. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
And you, Charlie?
Yeah, you can find me on Facebook and Instagram, both just my name, and then I do also have another Instagram, Charlie Cundiff Narrator, that eventually I'm going to figure out how to use to market, but I haven't put anything into that yet. But it's there, and it crazy. In about 2 weeks, it got almost as many followers as my much older account. So I don't know how that worked.
Marketing is kind of a mystery, I think, to most of.
Yeah. Oh, I posted 2 things and I got like as many followers. I'm like, how'd
Oh,
that happen?
nice. Yeah. All right. And I am Julia. I write as J.K. Allen. You can find me at hijinkswriter.com. Hijinkswriter on most social media except for TikTok, where it's Ginny and Tonic. That's Jinny and Tonic. Thank you so much for joining us. And we will be back next month on the first Monday of the month, as usual. And as always, it's always time to go indie now. Thank you so much for joining us.